Hey, Golf Country fans! I'm close to reattaching the frame to my car's body, but I couldn't bring myself to do it until I spot treated these rusty frame rails first. As usual, I made a first pass with a wire wheel on my reversible drill to flake off the loose junk. My poor old drill was intermittently losing power due to these worn out wires. So I took it apart, repaired the wires, cleaned it, and re-greased it. Good as new again. I attacked the next layer of rust with a flap disc on my angle grinder. For some of the hard to reach spots, I used a bit of 80 grit sandpaper. Then more wire wheel and more flap disc. Not super interesting to watch. But here's something I do want to show you. This adjustable bracket is one of the mount points for the brush guard that protects the front of the car. This hex nut and washer fasten the brush guard to the bracket. The bracket itself comprises two pieces, this flat egg-shaped part under the frame rail and a rectangular bar inside the frame rail. They're held together with an M5 machine screw. The screw head was too rusted to tell if it originally had a Phillips head or a hex hole. Either way, I successfully loosened it with an impact screwdriver. Here's how the bracket attaches to the brush guard. Later in this video, I'll show you how I used electrolysis to remove the rust from these parts. Stripping the rust off the other frame rail was more of the same. Lots of flap disc and wire wheel. But I did want to highlight a couple of things. First, when sanding near a raised edge like this, resist the temptation to run your sandpaper along the edge like a fence. Always orient your strokes perpendicular to the edge. If you ride the edge with your sandpaper, you're liable to create parallel scratches or grooves that could show through your paint. Second, here you can see the head of the machine screw that fastens the two-part bracket together. I couldn't find a hex key or Allen wrench to fit the hole, and a Phillips screwdriver wouldn't grip it. So I carved my own Phillips head into the screw with my Dremel tool. I first made what I'll call the east-west cut. Then I reoriented the tool 90 degrees to make the north-south cut. I was then able to crack the screw loose with my impact screwdriver. I used my bench grinder to remove some rust from all four bracket parts before heading indoors to try electrolysis on them. I normally soak my smaller parts in a 50-50 solution of white vinegar and water for several days to dissolve rust. It's cheap and fairly effective, but it is slow. I soaked these bracket parts the usual way for one night, then decided to try electrolysis in order to speed up the process. From the YouTube videos I watched, I learned that electrolysis requires a DC power source, like a car battery charger or a small appliance power adapter. I chose an old laptop brick because it puts out more power than my other options. Plus its wires were starting to look a lot like my old drill's cord. I cut off the output plug and stripped the two wires. I bought a pair of battery clips and soldered the red one to the white positive wire and the black clip to the black negative wire. Here's the finished product. Next, I filled a small fish tank with water and added some washing soda to boost its conductivity. I grabbed an old bolt from my scrap pile to use as my sacrificial anode. The part to be cleaned served as my cathode, which I suspended from a copper wire. I attached the red battery clip to my positive anode and the black clip to the negative cathode. Then I plugged in my power source. Within seconds, both the anode and cathode started generating bubbles. The bubbles rising from the positively charged anode are pure oxygen that is released as the bolt oxidizes or rusts. Meanwhile, the bubbles coming off of the negatively charged cathode are the hydrogen byproduct of the part's rust being chemically reduced. As time went on, the water darkened with rust. I decided to let it run overnight. The electrolysis process had visibly slowed down since the night before because the anode was completely covered with rust. This seemed like a good time to check the results, so I disconnected the power and removed the parts from the fish tank. Here's how the parts looked after being rinsed off with water. I still had 2 more bracket pieces to clean, so I sandblasted my anode bolt back to bare metal and repeated the process. A few hours later. This time the water didn't darken with rust, so I figured the parts were done cooking. The black areas are just remnants of the original paint. After the electrolysis, I cleaned the parts with a brass wire wheel in my drill chuck. The 2 bracket halves on the left have received the wire wheel treatment, while the ones on the right have not. You can also see that I bought new hardware to replace the old nuts and bolts. After running the wire wheel over all 4 bracket pieces, I primed them and painted them. Here's the finished product. Speaking of priming and painting, I still had to finish those frame rails that I started earlier. I chose to work on one frame rail at a time due to the limited amount of space between them. Here's that off-the-shelf paint that I found at Menards. I'm not too concerned about the color match because A, I plan to repaint the car in the near future, and B, these surfaces are mostly covered up by the engine and other components. After painting the frame rails, the only thing left to do was to reinstall the brush guard brackets. Thanks for watching. My next video will show you how I restored the fuel pump from this to this.